Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. The sun is shining in Costa del Sol. It's the Open this weekend at Royal Troon, so plenty of reasons for me to be smiley and happy. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst, as usual, for this United podcast. We're going to get into the latest news, particularly that Leny Yoro, butchered his name there, Samuel, to start the podcast, has agreed to join United. It's going to be a very exciting transfer and hopefully a brilliant signing. But first of all, Samuel, how are you?
Not bad, thank you. Not bad at all. How are you?
Yeah, quite happy, quite happy. Like I say, sunshine and the weekend is upon us. United play Rangers on Saturday afternoon, and me and Tyrone are making the trip up to Murrayfield, so that'll be something to look forward to. We'll jump straight into it, Samuel. A really, really exciting transfer, this one. Real Madrid were interested in Euro, but United had a bid accepted for him, and he's chosen to join or to move to Manchester. It could be brilliant, this.
I'm very interested to see how he does. As you said, he's such a young age, but where they're paying that fee for him, speaking to people who are a lot more familiar with him, they say he's a top talent, and you'd hope he was a top talent for that fee. And with United and Real Madrid being interested in you, he'll of course need a fair bit of time, as any 18-year-old would going to United, especially from a different country and a different league. Possible language barrier to navigate as well, but he'll have some good professionals around him in certainly in that central defensive department. Johnny Evans, who of course, has been around the block. If Harry Maguire stays, he's another one. Lisandro Martinez is a really good influence, as United fans have seen during his 2 years at the club. And it was just interesting looking, trying to find out a little bit more about him. That when he made his debut for Lille as a 16-year-old, it was away to Nice. So Dave Brailsford was in attendance for that game. Josh Thompson, the Ineos, I think he's a sports project manager, who we've seen around Old Trafford and at United games a fair bit. He was also in attendance for it. And I think although the first signing of the Ineos era was Joshua Zirkzee, I think the Euro one is kind of like more of a things to come, under this new United structure. I mean, Dan Ashworth, when he was at Brighton, the signing happened a couple of months before he took over as their technical director or sporting director. I forget what his official title was, but it was really once he had that axis with Graham Potter, who was appointed the following summer, that Yves Bissouma developed into one of the most accomplished central midfielders in the Premier League, and Bissouma signed from Lille. So there were some decent omens there. It is a big fee, and his age is not going to protect him from scrutiny or criticism. There will be some difficult days, as there always are with newly signed Manchester United defenders. I think by and large the newly signed centre backs in recent years, they've they've settled a little bit quicker, and ironically, the guy they have to thank for that is Eric Bailly, who's usually the fire starter rather than the firefighter during his time at United. But he had a brilliant start in 2016. Harry Maguire was pretty steady in 2019. Ditto Rafael Varane in 2021. Sandro Martinez, of course, it was a very chastening first couple of games, those two defeats to Brighton and Brentford, and being hooked off at half time at Brentford. But come the third game, he was terrific against Liverpool, and nobody has mentioned his height again since then. The one who had a really, really rocky start was Victor Lindelof. His first season was a little bit of a write off. I'm not too sure if he was even in the squad for the FA Cup final at the end of that season. He took a long, long time to really find his feet at the club. And you look at the age profile of those players. I think Bai was 22. He was quite young, especially for a 30 million signing when he came in 8 years ago. Lindelof must have been about 23, I think, 22, 23. Maguire was 26. Varane was 28. Martinez would have been 24, 25. So, um, in terms of the age range there, like, some of them quite relatively inexperienced, but with reasonable experience. Of course, Varane had been around a long, long time. Maguire had been an established Premier League defender for 3 or 4 years. Yoro is going in there in a very, very different in very, very different circumstances. So he will need time, quite understandably, and that's why it's logical for them to try and get in another centre back to beef up that area. I still feel, as I've said before, that what should have been their priority this summer, in terms of a signing to get in straight away, a defensive midfielder, a younger, more athletic defensive midfielder, that has still got to happen, and that will help the defence as well, immeasurably, because for all the issues with the back four last season and how how depleted a state it was in, quite often, there was no protection for it. And it was only really towards in the final games of the season that Ten Hag seemed to stumble upon a solution there in Sofian Amrabat, who played extremely well in three of the last four games, particularly the FA Cup final. I thought he was outstanding. So for now, I think Yoro has got a pretty good support network around him in terms of Martinez, Evans, Maguire. Lindelof they want to sell this summer, so I don't think he's necessarily worthy of mention. He'll be backed up by a really personable goalkeeper in Andre Onana. Diogo Dalot is a very bullish personality as well. All these players have got a hell of a lot of a wealth of experience of playing for Manchester United and other clubs. So I think the first season, obviously, the expectations have got to be reined in a fair bit, even though he's a youth player from France who's generates interest from Real Madrid. But it's an exciting it is an exciting signing because he's going to be there for the long term.
It really is, yeah. I saw Julien Laurent, who is obviously the French football expert you seen popping up on TNT Sports, formerly of BT, quite a bit. He tweeted and he found it interesting that Real Madrid said they're paying no more than 30 million euros. PSG said they're paying no more than 45 million euros. Obviously, United have come in with a deal that could rise to 70. But at the end of the day, Samuel, if you want one of the brightest prospects on the market, you're going to have to pay a premium. Yoro was in the final year of his contract, obviously, which is why Lille wanted to bank a fee. But it's so refreshing to see United land someone like this ahead of Real Madrid instead of signing him potentially 10 years down the line from Real Madrid when he's got a tubby belly or something like that.
And they will, they'll make that point as well, I'm sure, when it comes to put in a briefing out or background as to why they've signed him. And it's I think with every single deal, and I'd even include Mbappe going to Real Madrid, I think there's always a caveat. So it's not like this is unique, but of course, the word was that Yoro favoured Real Madrid, so there'll probably be some United fans who are really find that a red flag. Should United be going for someone who's not totally invested in joining the club, but clearly the United outbid the other clubs, and or they just they offered a much higher fee, and he's had little choice because Lille want the money, and he's clearly receptive to going to United, and United did work on convincing him to join the club for a week or so, and I can imagine there'll be some snippets that come out about that as well as to what measures they went to try and get him. Of course, in Spain and in Madrid, there's a slightly different spin on the deal, and I think it was in Marca this morning. They said that where Omar Barada's just started as chief executive, he wants a real transfer coup as a statement of intent, having only just started officially anyway on Saturday. And if you're blowing Real Madrid out the water to sign this young French defender, 13 years on from Real Madrid, Gazump United, to sign Rafael Varane, that's a pretty good start. The proof will be in the pudding, of course, and as I said, I don't think you'll be able to judge Yoro after one season, even maybe 2 seasons. He'll still be a very young age. It remains to be seen how or when he will get his senior recognition at international level with France. They've got some very good centre backs there. I mean, Jean-Claire Todibo, who looks like he's going to West Ham. He wasn't even in their squad at the Euros, and of course, if Jim Ratcliffe had it his way, then he'd have been transferred from Nice to United, but that couldn't happen due to the multi-club ownership. So it's easy for Real Madrid to spin it as, oh, this is why we didn't go for him, and also we've got this guy Mbappe in on a free transfer, albeit with a huge signing on fee, and that we're quite content with that. But he was a player. Yoro, that is, he was a player of interest to them. I think in Marca again today, they said that Madrid were maybe too confident that he was just going to go to them, because most players, if Real Madrid come for them, they want to join Real Madrid. But ultimately, the fee they offered just didn't get anywhere near what Lille wanted, and United have spent quite a high fee. There is some real surprise at Everton that United have pled poverty over their offers for Jared Branthwaite, yet they've gone in quite hot and heavy to get Yoro, who is younger than Branthwaite. He plays in league currently, or was playing in Liga. Never played in the Premier League before, so you can understand Everton looking at that and thinking, well, why have United taken that strategy with Lille when with us they've frankly taken the mickey a little bit. Certainly with the opening bid, which just there was absolutely no chance of that ever getting accepted, and of course that'll only embolden Everton to continue to hold out for a fee at the very minimum of 70 million for Branthwaite, and you have to doubt whether that will happen now, because as I said, United have been pleading poverty, and they can be quite economical with the truth at times, in terms of their version of the market and how the market's working, and the suggestion that they had a budget of tens of millions. I think you have to take it at face value, but speaking to other people, they weren't quite convinced by that. And speaking to someone else yesterday, they said that United have got plenty of money, and that would be reflected by the amount they've spent already on two signings, with more likely to come in. Of course, they will get funds from sales as well, and those funds will be reinvested into the squad. Mason Greenwood's an example of that. He's just arrived in Marseille, so it's two steps in the right direction. I mean, the fact that they're getting two signings done within the space of a week. It always gets busier when clubs come back for pre-season, busier in terms of the market, that is, and particularly where this summer's had two major international tournaments as well. It was always bound to be a pretty slow start.
The only time I've watched Yoro was actually in the quarterfinals of the Conference League against Aston Villa. I do seem to remember he was very good in those games. So I messaged my Aston Villa supporting friend, and he quote unquote said, yeah, he bossed those two games. Ironically, Aston Villa progressed on penalties when Emi Martinez used those tactics, but I think he did acquit himself very well, which bodes well against a Premier League opponent. It bodes well for this season. I actually think he could be used at right back this season, Samuel. When you look at his profile, I mean, he's 18 years old. He played 44 games for Lille last season, so he gained a lot of experience. But coming into the Premier League and playing at centre-half at that age is a tough task. It is going to be a challenge for any player. He's still yet to fill out his frame. He's a tall lad. I think he's around 6'1", is he? But he does need to physically mature, as anyone would at that age. And I could see him playing at right back. And when you actually look at those kind of tactics last season, Manchester City, Liverpool, Aston Villa, and Arsenal all played central defenders and fullback roles last season. It became an increasingly popular trend last year. Obviously, Pep Guardiola and Mikel Arteta have kind of led the way in that. And when you think of Enzi Konsa playing at right back for Aston Villa, Ben White, Nathan Ake, for example. So we've seen the benefits of that kind of tactical tweak at other clubs. And I think we've discussed a few times how United seem to be behind the trend often with these tactical innovations. And I could see Euro playing at right back. Could you see that?
I don't think it's a bad shout. It was a trope of Sir Alex Ferguson's with some young defenders that he would play them at right back or full back, just to almost keep them out of harm's way and to try and add a string to their bow. And he certainly did it with Chris Smalling and Phil Jones and their first years at United. I mean, I go back to the start of Jones's United career, and frankly, for someone who was at the club for 12 years, his United career did peak in the first month or two, because United scored an obscene amount of goals at the start of that league season. They battered Arsenal 8-2, Tottenham 3-0. Bolton 5-0. They beat Chelsea 3-1. These were their first 5 or 6 games of the season, and Jones did play right back against Bolton and was particularly good. He was a revelation there. I'm not too sure if he'd played right back at Blackburn before, but Ferguson, who could be prone to tinkering, sometimes in terms of trying to add strings to a player's bow and trying to make them as versatile as versatile as possible, he actually diminished their impact as a player. And Jones, of course, played in centre half. He played at right back. He played in midfield. And long term, I don't think that really helped him. And of course, the injuries were a much bigger issue. But I mean, another player I can think of, Danny Welbeck, who came through as a striker, and Ferguson played him on the wing because, again, if you're a striker coming through, you've not got as much pressure on you if you're playing as a winger. But I found that quite counterproductive to Welbeck's development. And his best season at United was when he was playing through the middle with Wayne Rooney in 2011-12. So Smalling and Jones are two examples of centre backs who've come in at United, and they have been able to adapt to playing, albeit on a short-term basis, as right backs. I mean, I think during that run at the start of 11-12, Smalling was the one who predominantly played at right back. I mean, my mind played tricks on me. I thought it would have been Jones, but Jones, of course, had just signed that summer, so maybe Ferguson wanted to actually give him a spell at centre-back first and foremost. And that game against Bolton, I don't think Smalling was playing in it, and Rio Ferdinand was, but I digress. And as you said, I mean, if you've not done it as a piece, you probably should do, because you look
Yeah, I
at
did
the
it this
pictures
morning.
of Yoro. You look at the pictures of Yoro, and he almost looks he looks borderline malnourished, and I mean that in the kindest sense. He's a tall 18-year-old who has only made his debut a couple of years ago, and at that age and the amount of games he's played, he's bound to still be quite wayfish. And he will, I'm sure he'll put on a stone in England of muscle, because he is going to have to be a lot more physical. But that will come in time. I don't think that's a problem. And where they obviously wanted to sell Aaron Wan-Bissaka, that does offer them an option if they were to go down that line. I think ideally you'd still want a specialist right back in there. But say it's a Europa League group, it's not a group game anymore, is it? I think it's a league game under this new format. But you'd think there'd be an opportunity to play Yoro there. I mean, I think about 5 years ago, Brandon Williams was starting in Europa League group games. So, this first season, it's clearly going to be one of adaptation for him. And it will be brutal at times, because that's the nature of playing for Man United. And you've got to be objective in analysing it, and taking into account the expectations there. And although he's a player for the long term, they do need significant short term gains as well. They can't have a season remotely like the one they had last season. And I can imagine Ten Hag. I mean, I think Ty said when he spoke to him in Trondheim, when it was mentioned about the season he had, he said, we won a trophy, and he's going to bang on about that until the day he departs United. But the bigger picture was they finished 8th in the Premier League. They lost 14 games. They finished bottom of their Champions League group. They're back in the Europa League this season. The FA Cup salvaged the season, but it was a brutal season, and it had to be a brutal season because they lost nearly 20 games last season, and they can't. I think they need to trim probably half of those defeats for the upcoming campaign if they're to have a much more successful season. So there'll be pressure on Yoro, as there is always pressure on players at Man United, and as sensitive and prissy as some fans and some staff at the club can get over coverage of players, whether they're doing well or not doing well. It's it's completely objective, and we're holding them to account, because there are standards that people expect from Man United, and the standards last season were way well below what they should have been, because they finished 8th.
Yeah, I think playing Euro at right back would make a lot of sense. You're heavily exposed at centre half, especially as an 18-year-old, and I don't think I can recall an 18-year-old starting week in, week out in the Premier League in that position. It is going to be a tough ask. I mean, even look at Jared Branthwaite, who was making his first full season for Everton last term. He's 21, 22, he's 22 now, so it just shows you how tough that area is. You talked about Branthwaite there, Samuel, and it could have an impact on this deal, really. I mean, United made a very early bid for Branthwaite. It was rejected. It was quite a low bid, wasn't it? I think Everton felt a bit disrespected by that. United went in with another one. But But as you said, Everton can just look towards this deal now and say, well, you've stumped up that cash for Yoro. Why can you do it for Branthwaite? I now suspect they're going to move on to Ligt as a priority target. I just have a suspicion now that perhaps the Branthwaite one isn't going to pull off.
Yeah, and also Amadou Onana looks about to be sold by Everton to Aston Villa for 50 million, which is a pretty crazy fee, I think, for a good player. But he's been at Everton for only 2 years, and look at Everton's league form in that time. I don't think that's and look at Belgium's form in the two international tournaments he's participated in as well. I don't think that's necessarily reflective of this value, but Everton have found a willing buyer, and Villa are prepared to pay that. So that does ease even more pressure on them to sell Branthwaite. I think it's got to the point now with the Yoro deal and also Onana going from Everton to Villa. I mean, I just don't think there's any chance whatsoever of Everton even accepting a compromise on Branthwaite, like a possible 55 million up front and 15 million in add-ons or something to that extent. They will absolutely want a minimum £70 million, and I don't think at this stage that there's a great danger of United missing the boat on him. In a year's time, there could be other clubs who would be in the market for Branthwaite and would go for him. His resale value might not be as high next year as well. I mean, Everton could get relegated, and at which point there's no way they're going to be getting anywhere near £70 million for him. But he's a player that Everton have consistently said that they don't want to sell, understandably, because they're a big club. They do want to build that squad under Sean Dyche. If you take the points deduction out of the equation last season, they had a progressive season, and I think there's scope for them to progress a little bit more this season as well. And he would be integral to that with that defensive spine with James Tarkowski and Jordan Pickford. I think they're three players who could underpin a surge up the table and possibly into the top half of the table. So I can understand Everton's outlook on it, and also Branthwaite's under contract until 2027 now, so it does possibly put them in an invidious position next year if they've not made sufficient progress, and there is still a market for him, which there is bound to be whenever Everton have a young player come through their academy. It's just a matter of when they're going to be sold. I mean, obviously Wayne Rooney went to United 20 years ago. Ross Barkley didn't quite work out in the same way for a myriad of reasons, but eventually he did go to one of the elite in Chelsea in 2018, and it is a matter of time until Branthwaite leaves Everton, but it might not necessarily be this year now because of the circumstances that have come before and after that last bid from United. I think the last bid was at 45 rising to 50 million or something like that. I struggled to keep up, but
they should have started with that, really. I know it's the tactic of going.
Yeah, I agree.
It felt a little bit disrespectful, that didn't it, the opening bid.
I mean, certainly Everton would have felt disrespected by it, given what happened with the joint Fellaini and Baines bid in 2013 of £28 million, which was just amateur hour from United. And it feels like it's an offer that the club are still trying to recover from in terms of their market strategy. But I completely agree. I mean, it did look a bit daft of United, whether they thought it was a tactical bid or not. And then they took their time getting the second bid in, which was also just kind of like rejected instantly. So they've expended quite a lot of energy, and maybe they think the player will agitate, but I don't know. I don't think that will necessarily get him anywhere. And we've seen it with other players before that they've agitated or they've threatened to go on strike, and they've still not got their way. I mean, Owen Hargreaves wanted to join United in 2006. Bayern Munich said no. That was the final answer, and he didn't go that summer. He ended up going to United the next year. So United definitely need another centre back, at least one more. And De Ligt it's a slam dunk of a deal. It's not necessarily a deal I think United should be make. I think they'd be signing someone based on their form 5 years ago rather than their form in the last 5 years. And looking at that Dutch side at the Euros, it was an impressive back four, but I think the mistake Koeman made was playing Stefan de Vrij over Mickey van de Ven. So when you take that into account as well. I mean, Ligt, I don't think anybody expected him to be so far down the pecking order of Dutch centre-backs, and his stock has gradually dwindled in the past 5 years, and he was let's face it, he was a failure at Juve, he's been a failure at Bayern Munich, where he's not been a regular, so it would be a real tall order for him to go to Man United and be a big success there.
But none of that matters, Samuel, because he's Dutch and he's worked with Ten Hag before, so tick and get him in, holding the shirt up with the signing photo. United are clearly taking a longer term view of these signings, aren't they? It's the new strategy with the new football structure in place. Branthwaite is 22, Yoro is 18, and I mean, if you look at the core of the team now, that could potentially be there for the next 10 years if they keep hold of these players. Yoro at centre half, Kobbie Mainoo in midfield, Rasmus Højlund leading the line, and Alejandro Garnacho hopefully on one of the wings. That's in a really, really exciting core for fans to look forward to. So exciting times ahead. We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll continue with the transfer chat because Mason Greenwood is on his way to Marseille. We discussed it on one of the previous podcasts. Around 26 million, Samuel. We've kind of went over why it's so important for United to sell Greenwood this summer multiple times, I believe. Is there anything more to add to this? Like I say, we'll have discussed it quite a bit.
Not a great deal. I was told that the agency orchestrating that deal, finalising it, is the agency that represents Roberto De Zerbi, who of course is the Marseille manager. So that may partly account for why De Zerbi has been so staunchly defensive of the Greenwood deal, because there has been some rancour out in France over Marseille signing someone who is, let's face it, a polarizing figure because of the reasons we all know. But I just think that, I mean, De Zerbi, of course, was one of the many managers that United considered to replace Ten Hag. But as good a job, well, it was a brilliant job he did in his first season at Brighton. I always felt he wasn't right for United. Some of the things that went on behind the scenes at Brighton, I think it's safe to say that he was quite a combustible presence, and just the prospect of him coming into United and the first port of call being, right, we're keeping Mason Greenwood, I want Mason Greenwood, that is baggage that United could well have done without. So they've dodged that. Greenwood is already in Marseille as well. He flew there with his father on Wednesday evening. That chapter of nearly 2.5 years, isn't it? Pretty much 2.5 year period in United's history. Turbulent, to say the least. Fraught, badly handled last summer by the club. Fortunately, it's nearing its end, and well done to the supporters, because they were the ones who forced the club into that climb down last year, into backtracking over their plans to reintegrate him in the squad. It almost feels like a bad dream how badly United handled that last year. It was. I mean, I thought it was quite disgraceful, really. But fortunately, a line is about to be drawn under it.
Yeah, I spoke to the group of women who were bravely protesting. I think it was before the opening game of the season, wasn't it? August, Wolves at home.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, for the nighttime game when Andre Onana clattered the Wolves player. I can't remember who it was, and they should have got a penalty. But I spoke to them for a piece, and I just think they were a massive part of it. And obviously the backlash that followed made the club, forced them into that U-turn, which was necessary in my opinion. If we look at the sales that United have done so far, then Samuel, and we'll include Mason Greenwood in that, Willy Camboire, Donny van der Beek, Alvaro Fernandez, shouldn't forget him because that was at the very, very start of the window, and now Mason Greenwood as well. I think they've made a very strong start to this window in terms of selling players. There is still more work to do. Discuss Wan-Bissaka there, who's in the final year of his contract, Victor Lindelof, Hannibal Mejbri as well. I'd quite like to see them sold to raise funds. But I think it's been a really promising start, actually. We're only in the middle of July, and United have built a reputation for being quite slow and pedestrian in the market. They usually wrap up deals quite late. But with this new structure in place, I think they've done quite good work so far.
It's been decent going. I mean, some of them, it shouldn't have been difficult for them to get them out of the building. I mean, they'll get a small fee for Amari Forson as well, because of the fact that he came through the academy and he left on a free. Again, he's no loss. I found. I mean, Ten Hag seemed to see something in him that nobody else could, but in the end, he opted to leave on a free. And there were a couple of times, I think, while he was at the club where he was having his head turned by clubs who were possibly interested. But that they are players who, I mean, the Camboire fee when that was offered, United would have been daft to have turned that down. Player who's only 19, only started 3 games for the club, has had an injury-prone time at the club, would have been fifth choice centre back at best, probably maybe sixth. It made infinite sense to cash in. So, they need to now move on to more senior players, and that's where it does become trickier, because the market for those players is a little bit smaller. But you still look at Scott McTominay, who has already generated bids that have been rejected by United. You look at Wan-Bissaka. For all his faults in the final third, I still think Wan-Bissaka would enhance the majority of Premier League teams as a right back going in.
Well, funnily enough, we've said all season that West Ham will actually be a logical destination for him, and
Yeah,
seems to be some
and
pace gathering behind that one, doesn't it?
yeah, I've half wondered whether that would end with Lopetegui coming in, but if anything, it seems to have fueled it. I mean, West Ham certainly liked the look of him going into I think it was approaching the 23 winter transfer window, but because of Diogo Dalot's injury, Wan-Bissaka that was kind of like the start of Wan-Bissaka's mini renaissance, and he had a very good second half of that season. So West Ham have been interested for quite some time, and I think their starting right back's Kufal, isn't it? The Czech Republic international, and I don't think they've got much in reserve there. I think Ben Johnson might have left this summer. I think I saw a picture of him being unveiled somewhere. So if Wan-Bissaka was to go there, he'd be starting for them. And Lopetegui, it'd be a good move for him. It'd be going back to London. It'd be playing at a big club. Lopetegui's a good coach with very good pedigree. I think he'll be sticking around there longer than he did at Wolves, most certainly. So Wan-Bissaka, I think you look at Wan-Bissaka and you expect him to move to a club in London. You look at Lindelof. I don't necessarily think that he'll be going to a Premier League club. I think that would be a surprise unless there's an unlikely solution there. You can see him moving abroad again. And the ones that are really going to test them are McTominay and to a lesser extent Maguire, given their contract situations. Because although McTominay has got that +1 option, so if effectively he's under contract for another 2 years, and that +1 option does safeguard his value, but he would have to, provided he stays at United beyond the transfer window, he'd have to have another particularly exceptional season for his resale value to be as high as it is at the moment next year.
But realistically, how much do you think it would be fair for Scott McTominay right now? Because I think Fulham's opening bid's been quite disrespectful as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, last year United rejected a bid for him of £30 million, and I thought at the time that was pretty much his worth, and United were quoting 40 million. I would say at the moment he is 40 million. He's a £40 million player. He's robust. He's got international experience of playing at 2 Euros. He's come through the United Academy. He got 10 goals last season. And you look at those 10 goals, all of them were crucial in some way or form. A lot of them were winners. A couple of them were in the FA Cup quarter-final, the FA Cup semi-final. Like, he'd come on away to Wolves with United 2-1 up. He'd score and make it 3-1. There wasn't one goal that was just a stats padding goal. Romelu Lukaku had that tendency at United at times, but McTominay's goals were all important. So he's only 27 still. If you had him on a 5-year contract, there's every chance that in 4 or 5 years' time he would still be an important player in your team. He's got good winning pedigree, having won the League Cup and the FA Cup with United. He started in a Europa League final, started in an FA Cup final. 2 years, effectively 2 years left in his contract. I would argue he's a £40 million player, and that's always been the issue with McTominay possibly going this summer, would a club actually spend that much on him, particularly given his contract situation? But it's the tricky part for United is that they could get a very good fee for him this summer, and next summer after a season where he's possibly not played as much and he's become more peripheral, they wouldn't be able to command as large a fee. And does that have a knock-on effect in terms of what they can do recruitment-wise with incomings? So I think it'd be very ambitious of them. It'd be an ambitious statement for them to actually say, "Look, we will sell you for this fee this summer," but it's whether that fee comes in. I don't think they can be as proactive about it as maybe with Lindelof, who I was told last week they are trying hard to sell, because Lindelof is, he's going to be way down the pecking order, particularly if when another centre back comes in. But the state of the midfield is a bit of a problem, I think, in that they've got 5 midfielders there. Casemiro, people just kind of like look at it as an afterthought, but he captained the team in Trondheim. He's the only defensive midfielder in that squad. Christian Eriksen almost certainly will not be a Man United player this time next year. He's into the last year of his contract, and he became a little bit redundant last season. It seemed that whoever he played with in midfield, he'd become an incompatible partner for. And you look at who he could play with now in midfield, and it just doesn't. It doesn't compute. In the first season he was at the club, it was him and Casemiro, and they were brilliant, but it was short term. If you were to have them in the United midfield next season, then they are not going to be reaching the levels of the performance levels of their first season at the club. McTominay is, he's a strange one in that people didn't know whether he was caught between two stools. Was he a defensive midfielder? Was he an attacking midfielder? Ten Hag has settled on him being an attacking presence in that team, and he fulfilled his role in the FA Cup final very, very well. I thought he was like the glue between the attack and the midfield, and he had a big, big role in ensuring United were compact that day. And his running off the ball was he's as I said earlier, he is a robust athlete, but I suppose the caveat to that is that if you were to put him in a midfield too, against an elite team, it's difficult to see how that functions. There are issues there. I don't think there are as many issues if he's coming up against relegation fodder, but as we saw with United last season against relegation fodder, they did find it tough at times. They had a couple of slugfests with Sheffield United. They scraped a 1-0 win against Burnley. They drew 1-1 with Burnley. They only beat Luton by 1 goal in their 2 games against them, and in the away game, they had to take 2 players off at half time because they were walking a tightrope, having been booked. So that's how the playing field feels a lot more level now in the Premier League, even though the quality is maybe not what it once was. But in terms of whatever team you come up against, it doesn't feel like there are any gimmies anymore, and there did used to be.
United made it
so
look that way last
that does
season
have a tactical.
Because it was so bad.
Yeah,
There definitely is a few gimmies you can take advantage of, but they were just so poor last season.
Possibly, and maybe with some more incomings, they'll be able to settle more. But even in Ten Hag's first season, which of course was a very successful season, but they didn't win many games easily, I would say. Going to Bournemouth away towards the end of the season, it was a tight 1-0 win. There are other examples.
Other teams do, though, Samuel.
They don't. Yeah, they do, but United aren't as good as them. I mean, United don't thrash teams under Ten Hag. I think United have scored. I don't think United have scored 5 goals in a game under Ten Hag, have they? I think they've scored 4 goals a few times, but I don't think they've had an outright 4-0 win. So, if they can start finding that clinical streak to them, where they can see off teams, then it enables more players to get more playing time, and then people aren't going to worry about McTominay playing in midfield with Kobbie Mainoo and who's going to hold the fort, because those two played against Liverpool in the FA Cup quarter-final, which was, after the final, it was the highlight of last season. But we all still remember that extraordinary Grand Canyon that developed between the defence and the midfield in the first half. and in a game that Liverpool did a hell of a job in keeping Ten Hag in a job last season across the 3 games against United, but that's because Mainu is a brilliant midfielder who is going to venture forward. McTominay is a goal getter. He's going to venture forward. So who's going to be the sentry there? There was no one, and Liverpool didn't take advantage of it. And United, credit to them, they pulled off an extraordinary win that season, but there wasn't much tactical thinking behind it, and you can't repeat that on a weekly basis in the manager's 3rd season after what was by and large a failure of the 2nd season, even though they did salvage silverware from it.
Just rattling off, pardon me, 2 results I've quickly Googled. Aston Villa beat Sheffield United away from home 5-0. Newcastle beat Sheffield United 8-0 away from home. United rock up at Bramall Lane in the struggle to get past them 2-1. Obviously, Scott McTominay scored the opening goal.
77th minute winner.
Dallo scored the winner. Yeah, it was the day after Sir Bobby Charlton passed away, so the mood was a bit somber around that match. However, I think United always feel, oh look, everyone raises their game against us, but that excuse doesn't wash against Sheffield United, who were absolutely crap last season. And like I say, McTominay scored the goal. He scored so many important goals last season. I think he must be kept. I think it's imperative. Same with Harry Maguire. Actually, I think they were just huge parts of that.
Would you give him a new contract? McTominay, that is.
I think I would. It doesn't have to be 5 years. It can be 3 years or 2 years with an option, I believe. I think that's the sensible way to play it. I just think he's such a good squad player, and I think no matter where they go in the next few years, he's still got a lot of value to add off the bench and in the squad and in the dressing room as well. I think he's a great character to have around the place. He is an academy player, and we've talked about, I think it's a good point to make, how we've talked about United struggling to offload academy players for decent prices. But we talked about Willy Camboala there, Alvaro Fernandez. And I think it's gone in the radar, Samuel. They've actually sold academy players for better fees this summer. So that looks to be improving as well. And that's been a criticism. We've said they need to improve in that area. And I think they are. Quickly going back to the midfield then. It's an important point you make. I think, in my opinion, at the start of the window, I think that had to be the priority, considering how poor Casemiro was. He just regressed with each month. He was a complete shadow of himself. Couldn't string a pass together, sometimes 6 yards. He was flying into challenges. He was far too rash. And his drop-off was a huge factor in the declining results last season. I guess it's who they bring in. That's probably always been a point of discussion. You look at Ugarte at PSG. I think he's getting linked now. But now they've signed a forward and they're closing in on a deal for Leny Yoro. I think a midfielder has to be the priority. Would you agree with that?
As you just said then, I'd have had it as the priority at the start of the summer. And it's not always that simple. Clearly with Xerxes, there was a void there because Marshall had left. So they had the leverage to go out and get a striker. Varane had been released, so it was quite logical, I suppose, to get a defender in. Whereas with the midfield, Sofian Amrabat was only there on loan last season. Someone at Man United still thinks he's at the club because he's still there on the first team player section on the club website, which is bizarre. 18 days after he ceased to be a United player, but the midfield, they've got 5 midfielders, which is quite a lot of midfielders. So there's not a lot of, where's your leverage there to bring one in proactively? I think that they're going to have to be maybe 1 or 2 sales before they can finance a big move or a good move for a good midfielder who's going to come in there and be the sentry in that team and provide an adequate shield for the back 4 next season. And in fairness to Casemiro, he was quite selfless towards the end of last season in playing at centre-back over the course of, 6 or 7 games, maybe more. And as we kind of like said before the cup final, we said that there was a danger that he was playing his way out of the team for the cup final. And in the end, that's exactly what happened because Amrabat starts in midfield ahead of him. And it was always going to be Varane and Martinez as the defenders. But that Palace game, which of course was the nadir last season, one of the problems, apart from Casemiro's general defending, was the midfield. It was Eriksen, Mainu, and their record together, 2 midfielders who are quite similar in terms of the way they play the game, but at opposite ends of the of the age scale. It's just not conducive to getting results. And Ten Hag probably knew that at Forest earlier in the season when he took Mainu off at half time and put McTominay on with Eriksen. Unfortunately for him, United ended up losing that game 2-1, and the big talking point afterwards was that he the removal of Mainu at half-time was tactical and it wasn't enforced. And I think his approval ratings plummeted a fair bit that night. But when he tried it again, I think Tottenham at home, they got outplayed with Eriksen and Mainu in midfield. I've just mentioned the Palace game. You had the Burnley game as well, where I think it was Eriksen and Mainu, and there was a cacophony of boos from United supporters because Ten Hag took Mainu off over Eriksen. So that midfield is an issue there. And say it was to remain the same for the start of the season, Fulham on a Friday night, you would probably say at the moment it would have to be Mainu and Casemiro because it's the most compatible partnership. And as you have said before, speaking to someone who knows Mainu, he likes playing with Casemiro because Casemiro does allow him to venture forward, and that is what Mainu was starting to do for England at the European Championship. I've said before, he reminds me a hell of a lot of Andres Iniesta, and Iniesta effectively became a playmaker towards the end of his career at Barcelona because he was that brilliant a footballer, that great a footballer, in fact. And I think Mainu has got the capabilities to do that. So you want him to go wandering further afield, but you need someone who's going to hold the fort in the meantime. Casemiro does not really have the mobility to do it. Maybe he'll have a great comeback this season and prove everyone wrong, shove Jamie Carragher's words down his throat. But I think it's a big ask, and whether Casemiro is capable of doing that or not, they just need another number 6. I mean, Ten Hag said that after Amrabat signed in September. He said we didn't have another number 6, so now we've got that option. And then Ten Hag proceeded to not play him there as often as he possibly should have done. But it did all work out well in the sense that Amrabat was brilliant in the FA Cup final.
I would absolutely love if Casemiro proved everyone wrong. I've been quite harsh in my criticism, which has been fair last season. He was really poor, and that's without focusing in on his performance as a centre-half, because before he was playing in central defence, he was incredibly poor in midfield. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think we've seen enough evidence over the course of last season to suggest that he's not going to return to that player. Brilliant if he does, but I think it's a huge gamble to start next season with him as your centre defensive midfielder.
Yeah.
Mainu and Fernandes, you guaranteed starters. You need someone to be the foil to those two players, to sit in front of the defence and to sweep up. And Casemiro, unfortunately, wasn't doing that job effectively last season. Just lastly then, Samuel, United playing Rangers on Saturday. They played Rosenborg on Monday night. I think we did well to stay awake during that game. Ty spoke to Ten Hag in the mix zone after it, and he gave a good line with Jadon Sancho, where he basically just repeated that they've drawn the line. He didn't really say much more than that, but that was the headline. What are we expecting from the Rangers game? Probably more of the same if we're honest, but would like to see, hopefully for my sake and Ty's sake, a few more senior players coming into the side.
My answer to that was about to start with, I hope for your sake, and then you said, hopefully for your sake. I do hope for your sake, though, that there are more senior players involved in that game, even the possibility of Sancho being involved, just to give you something more to write about. I mean, Radek Vitek does deserve his flowers, as you say. I thought he was tremendous against Rosenborg. He made one save in the second half where he got a gloved it onto the crossbar. That was a world-class save. He was a one-man defence. It was a real pity for him that he was finally breached in the 93rd minute. But you look at the stats from that game, and Ten Hag was, again, we've said before, in terms of criticism and the coverage of United, how people at the club can actually be a lot more critical, or are more critical, in fact, than us journalists. And nobody was going to be scathing about United after that performance, but Ten Hag was. He said it was below standards, not top football. Even when he was asked about Vitek, he said he had opportunities to show what he could do, which was almost like not a backhanded compliment to the keeper, but it was more criticism of the team's performance. And some people look at that team, and Ten Hag said himself, the majority of the squad members will not be in the squad next season. But he's also aware that they had certainly in the Premier League and the Champions League last season, they had a bad season. and he has got to raise standards immeasurably this season. So if he doesn't maintain those standards at the risk of them dropping, he leaves himself open to trouble. So I didn't have a problem with what he said. He said it before, after friendlies. He said it after, I think, the game against Real Betis and Cadiz during the winter training camp, which of course was with similar squads by and large, very callow players who were never really going to get a look in at United when the competitive action restarted. I think he described the performance, or portions of the performance, against Dortmund in Las Vegas last year as unforgivable. I remember when we also spoke to him in Melbourne, after they'd beaten South Melbourne, he was seething about the goal United conceded and said their defence fell apart like a pack of cards. That was the quote he gave. So I don't have an issue with him being as critical as he was. And some of those players did go through the motions. And United were actually marginally better in the second half with an 11 that comprised entirely of academy players. I know you in particular are still a bit of a defender, I think, of Hannibal Mejbri, but I don't see anything different. He's bustling off the ball, but if he gets the ball, he just doesn't seem to do anything with it, which is one of the reasons why United want to sell him. But it was a tough watch. I mean, when United's X account is putting a clip out of a player just controlling the ball, running down the touchline and getting tackled, and trying to, thinking this is viral content, and I hate the word content, but you can imagine what the brains trust are thinking. I don't think it was ever going to get many more new subscribers. It was, as you said, it was a tough watch. United only had 2 attempts on target. I think Rosenborg had 22 attempts at goals. So the shot statistic, it's continuing, even in friendlies, but it was with a squad that is not going to. I mean, United squad in Norway, it's not going to look anything like that against City in the Community Shield. Never mind Fulham in the first Premier League game of the season.
Yeah, I think some context to add. I mean, Rosenborg were in the middle of their season, aren't they? And you could tell that they had the fitness edge. They've actually played 17 games in Denmark. And some of the challenges they were flying into were very un-pre-season like. They were very tough. So I guess in that side of things, it was a good test.
I think they're also 11th out of 16 teams.
I mean, that's true. That's an important bit of context as well.
No, they were a lot fitter, definitely.
Yeah, and that is a huge advantage. Radek Vitek, though, what a performance. It was like the ghost. Well, he's not dead. I've just killed off Peter Schmeichel, but it was like Peter Schmeichel reincarnated in that game. He made some fantastic saves. I think it's really interesting, actually. Matej Kova was kind of impressive last pre-season, and then he went on to join Bayer Leverkusen. He was obviously 23 years old, another Czech Republic goalkeeper. Vitek's only 20. He's just had one loan, like Rain Stanley. I asked Travis Binion about him when I spoke to him at the end of last season. I included him in the successful loans, I think of 3 or 4 that I asked about. So I think he could have a really promising future, actually. 6'6". He really is imposing. And
yeah, he's a really tall bloke.
Yeah, I think you said him on your blog posts. He'll be playing somewhere better than Accrington Stanley next season. Definitely.
I think he will. With all due respect to Accrington, I don't think he'll be plying his trade in League Two next season. I half joked to Ty that he's warming up for a loan move to Shrewsbury, which is of course where Dean Henson started to make waves in one of his first loan spells away from United. Joe Hart, of course, started out there. Yeah. So yeah, it's a bit of a goalkeeping factory there, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing at, I think League One at the very least is the level he should be seeking a move to. And also as part of that Accrington loan, I think he signed a new contract. So there's a lot of time left on his contract. Whether he is seen as a future number 2 at United, given Tom Heaton will be retiring next year or the year after possibly. Altay Bayindir, I don't think anybody looks at him and thinks he's going to be around too long. It's not like he's the new Sergio Romero, so it's win-win for United that he'll have good resale value, or there's someone who could certainly be around the first team and maybe back up Onana at some point later down the line.
First impressions are always really important, and Altay Bayindir had to wait until January when he played against Newport to make his first impression. But Samuel, he wore tights under his shorts, and it's not acceptable in my book. You can't wear tights.
It wasn't that cold that day either, I've got to say. we were in the salubrious surroundings of Newport. It's not particularly cold.
There was someone who wore gloves in the semi-finals of the FA Cup against Coventry. I can't remember who, so I'm not assassinating a character. But that's the equivalent, really, of wearing tights, I think. Thanks, Samuel. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thanks, listeners, as usual. We'll be back on Monday for another podcast to reflect on the Rangers game. Take care.